years of cattle grazing have basically wiped out the forest in this particular area. The only thing that's left are a few large koa trees and introduced weeds. This is a good example of what's happened to a lot of Hawaii's forests, in that this would have been, in the past, it would have been a koa forest. And what we see here is a koa tree. Koa is very delectable for cattle. Cattle were introduced to Hawaii about 200 years ago, and grazing from cattle have wiped out the forest. Right here you can see under the koa tree there's a browse line. Everything from the ground up to 6 feet has completely been obliterated. Cattle have eaten the forest in this particular area. There are no native hoofed animals in Hawaii. Sheep and goats and cattle, they were brought in as domestic animals. Now they've gone feral in many instances. So we have many thousands of acres of Hawaii that are being impacted heavily by pigs, sheep, goats, deer, and cattle. In the past, with a native forest here, a complete native forest, there would have been many different insects and plants. The biodiversity would have been amazing in this particular area, but because of the loss of the plants, we've lost the snails, the insects, and the understory, and all that are left are just a few of these old trees, and that's about it. So then we came in 1989, we started planting trees. So none of these trees are older than 20 years, and this is the results of all of that planting. And there's many of the trees, they're all different ages.
The basics of restoring the forest really at Hakalau starts with where it's missing, and that's missing because of 200 years of grazing and introduced species being on the mountain. So once the areas are fenced, the refuge basically goes in and starts planting by hand in the pasture lands koa trees, and they're not doing this on their own, they're doing this with volunteer help.
The effort in our greenhouse is to try to build up the populations on the refuge so that we don't lose these plants to extinction. There's about 6 or 7 have left in the wild of this, so talk about endangered. A good example of a bird-pollinated mint is this Stenogene calamenthoides. Flower is sort of a purpley red to attract the birds, and if you look at the curved flower, it's almost exactly the same shape as the bird's bill. Fits like a glove. You can see the anthers right up here that give a little pat of pollen on top of the bird's head so that they pollinate it. And this is coevolution to the max in Hawaii. We just heard an amakihi in this koa and an apapane just behind. And if we were standing here 10 or 15 years ago, we wouldn't have seen those birds because this would have just been open pasture. And since we've added the trees, basically we've planted the small trees and they've grown, we've got the birds coming in. You used to stand on the cabin porch, have breakfast, and all you'd hear is introduced birds. You'd hear the game birds and that sort of thing. And now you stand on the porch at breakfast and you've got apapane, amakihi, alapaio, sometimes iiwi, right out in front of the cabin. And then of course the nene flying over, which hadn't been up there for probably 50 or 100 years.